Most women who try the silent treatment don't know they're already doing it wrong. You felt it, that moment when someone has disappointed you, disrespected you, or just shown you exactly who they are, and instead of fighting, you go quiet. You pull back. You stop texting first. You stop making yourself available. And you wait. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're hoping he notices. You're hoping the silence speaks louder than anything you could say, that he'll feel the distance, that he'll reach out. Sometimes he does. Sometimes he doesn't. And either way, you're left wondering, did I do that right? Did I just play games? Or is there actually something real happening psychologically when we go quiet? So I decided to stop guessing. I tested it, intentionally, strategically, for 7 full days. And what I found was not what I expected. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what the silent treatment actually does to a man's brain when it works, when it backfires, and what the most emotionally intelligent version of this move really looks like. Welcome back to Lena, where we talk about the things most people think but never say out loud. If you're new here, subscribe. We go deep on psychology, relationships, and how to navigate all of it with your self-worth fully intact. Let's get into it. Here's the thing about the silent treatment. It has a terrible reputation. And honestly, most of that reputation is deserved, because most people use it as a punishment, as a way to make someone feel bad, as control dressed up as composure. But there's a version of going quiet that has nothing to do with games. That's actually one of the most psychologically grounded moves a woman can make. The difference between those two things? It's not the silence. It's the intention behind it. And it's what happens inside you while you're quiet. Here's something most relationship content doesn't talk about. Research in attachment theory shows that humans are deeply wired to interpret absence as meaning. When someone we're bonded to goes quiet, our brain doesn't just notice it, it amplifies it. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thinking, starts working overtime trying to figure out what the silence means. Anxiety rises, attention sharpens, emotional weight increases. In plain language, silence gets noticed. The question is what it communicates once it does. After years of watching women try and fail with this approach, and honestly, trying it myself, I wanted to actually understand the mechanics. So let's break this down, starting with number 1. You've probably been in this situation. He does something that hurts you, cancels plans at the last minute, says something dismissive, goes cold for no reason. And instead of blowing up, you just stop. You stop initiating. Stop responding with warmth. Stop showing up the way you usually do. And then you watch. And you wonder if he'll connect the dots. Here's the first thing you need to understand. The silent treatment, in its classic form, is what psychologists call a withdrawal of affection. And studies consistently show it's one of the most anxiety-provoking experiences a person can face in a close relationship. Why? Because humans are wired for social connection. We're threat detection machines, and being cut off from someone we care about activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. It literally hurts. So if the goal is to make him feel something, it works. In the short term. But here's the catch. If your silence is coming from a place of wanting him to suffer, he will eventually feel manipulated. Not guilty, not reflective, manipulated. And that shifts the dynamic from him wanting to reconnect to him feeling controlled. That's when silence stops being powerful and starts being corrosive. The most effective silence is the kind you're doing for yourself. Not to send a message, not to win, but because you genuinely need space to figure out how you feel. That distinction, as subtle as it sounds, changes everything. And number 2 is where most women completely misread what his response actually means. Day 1 of my experiment, I stopped texting first. No good morning, No check-in, no reaction to his stories, just nothing. By mid-afternoon, he messaged, casual. Hey, how's your day going? Nothing significant, but he reached out. And here's what most women do in that moment: they interpret it as a win. He noticed. He reached out. But then they respond immediately, warmly, and the entire dynamic resets in about 4 minutes. Here's what's actually happening psychologically. When you pull back, his brain enters what behavioral scientists call a variable reward loop. Think about how slot machines work. The unpredictability of the reward is what makes them addictive. When you become less predictable, less immediately available, his brain starts working harder to seek your attention. It's dopamine-driven. He's not even fully conscious of it. But, and this is important, a man who responds quickly and warmly when you pull back is showing you his attachment style. He's anxiously attached, or he values you, or both. A man who doesn't respond, or who responds with coldness or passive aggression, that's telling you something just as important. Not that he doesn't care, but that his default response to perceived withdrawal is to withdraw further. That's an avoidant attachment pattern, and no amount of strategic silence is going to fix that. So the response you get isn't just feedback on your strategy. It's data about the relationship. The question is whether you're calm enough to read it accurately. But here's where it gets really interesting, because what you do with that information in days 3 through 5 is the make or break moment. By day 3 of my experiment, I felt the pull. You know the one. The urge to just send something, a meme, a one-liner, anything to break the silence and make the tension dissolve. Every woman who's tried this has felt it, and most of us have given in, and then immediately hated ourselves for it. Here's what most people don't tell you about that urge. It's not weakness. It's your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. When there's relational tension, even tension you've intentionally created, your body experiences it as a threat. Cortisol rises. Your brain wants resolution. It wants the discomfort to end. The problem isn't that you feel the urge. The problem is believing that giving in means you failed. That narrative keeps women in a mental prison, treating a relationship like a chess game where the first one to move loses. Real emotional intelligence doesn't look like perfect silence. It looks like knowing why you're staying quiet. If you've given in because you genuinely sorted through your feelings and you're ready to reconnect, that's not breaking. That's choosing. There's a massive difference between reaching out from a place of clarity and reaching out from anxiety. He can usually feel the difference too, whether he'd ever be able to articulate it or not. The goal isn't to outlast him. The goal is to figure out what you actually want to say, and only speaking when you're ready to say it. Which brings me to number 4, and what I actually learned on day 7, the result I genuinely didn't see coming. By day 7, something unexpected had happened. He had reached out multiple times. He'd been warmer, more present, more intentional. By every external measure, the experiment had worked, but I was sitting with something uncomfortable. The silence had shown me something I hadn't planned for. How much mental energy I had been spending trying to manage his perception of me. Here's the psychological truth that no one talks about in these make him miss you conversations. Going quiet, if you do it with intention and stay with the discomfort instead of distracting yourself, forces a reckoning. It creates enough space for you to hear your own thoughts without the noise of constant communication. And sometimes, what you hear is sobering. Psychologists refer to this as self-differentiation, the ability to maintain a clear sense of who you are and what you want within the emotional intensity of a relationship. It's one of the core pillars of emotional maturity, and it's genuinely hard because most of us, when we're anxious in a relationship, Either fuse, completely over-communicating, over-explaining, seeking constant reassurance, or we shut down entirely. Real differentiation is the third option. It's staying present with yourself, even when the relationship feels uncertain. 7 days of quiet gave me that space. And what I found in it wasn't a strategy. It was clarity about what I was tolerating, about what I was hoping he would give me, about whether those two things were ever going to match. And number 5 connects directly to this because what you do after the silence determines everything that comes next. Most advice about the silent treatment stops right before the most important part. Because pulling back is only half of it. Coming back is where the real work is. A lot of women go quiet, see that he responds, feel validated, and then slip right back into the same dynamic they were in before. Within a week, everything is exactly the same. The silence bought attention, not change. Here's what's actually happening at the neurological level when you return after a period of distance. Your reappearance triggers what's called a contrast effect. The brain registers shifts in stimuli more strongly than constant ones. After a period of quiet, your presence is more noticeable. Your words carry more weight. Your warmth is more felt. This is your window. How you use it tells him and you exactly what this relationship is capable of. If you come back with the same energy as before, you communicate that nothing changed. If you come back with more clarity, calmer, clearer about what you need, less reactive, you model a new standard. And that, not the silence itself, is what actually shifts relationship dynamics long-term. The re-entry conversation, whether it's light or serious, should feel like you've landed somewhere new. Not because you've performed distance, but because the space genuinely allowed you to arrive somewhere different inside yourself. That's not a trick. That's growth. And it's magnetic in a way that no strategy can replicate. And the 6th thing I learned, this one surprised me most of all, is what silence does to you when the relationship isn't actually worth saving. Not every story ends with him chasing. Not every silence leads to a reconnection. And that's the part no one wants to say out loud. For some women, going quiet, genuinely quiet, not performatively, leads them to a realization they'd been avoiding. That the relationship has been running mostly on their energy. That the moment they stop initiating, stop texting first, stop creating opportunities for connection, there's just nothing. Not a dramatic absence, just quiet. This is not a failure. This is information. Research on what psychologists call the relationship investment model, built on the work of Carol Rusbolt, shows that people stay in relationships based on 3 things: satisfaction, quality of alternatives, and how much they've already invested. What silence strips away is the noise, the busyness, the momentum of a relationship that's being held together by one person's constant effort. When that effort pauses, the real foundation becomes visible, and sometimes it's not there. If the man in your life doesn't reach out, doesn't seem to register the distance, responds to your quiet with relief or indifference, that is data. Not data that you're not enough, data that you too are not enough for each other. And the kindest thing that silence can do in those cases is make that visible before you invest another year waiting for something to change. Silence, at its most powerful, doesn't just get his attention, it gets yours. And that leads me to the final point, the one thing that determines whether any of this actually matters for your life. There's a version of the silent treatment that is genuinely powerful, and it has almost nothing to do with him. It's the version where you go quiet because you respect yourself enough to not perform availability you don't feel. Where you stop talking because you need to think. where you create distance not as a move, but as a form of self-care. That version works not because it makes him miss you, though it often does, but because it makes you clearer, more grounded, less reactive. Women who operate from that place don't need a strategy. They naturally filter for the men who can handle a woman who knows her own mind. The women I've seen use silence most effectively were the ones who genuinely didn't care if it worked in the conventional sense. They weren't tracking whether he responded within 2 hours. They were using the quiet to check in with themselves, to rest, to reconnect with their own desires and standards outside of the relationship's gravitational pull. In psychology, this is sometimes called secure functioning, the ability to act from your own values rather than from fear of losing someone. Securely attached people don't play games, but they also don't abandon their own needs in order to maintain connection. They hold both. And that balance, that groundedness, is ultimately what creates attraction that doesn't fade. The trick isn't the silence. The trick is who you're being inside the silence. If you've ever found yourself going quiet and then immediately feeling guilty about it, like you're being manipulative, like you're playing games, like you should just say what you feel, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to need space. You are allowed to take time before you respond. You are allowed to protect your energy when you're unsure. That is not manipulation. That is self-respect. The confusion between the two is something a lot of us inherited, the idea that we have to be endlessly available in order to be loving, that silence means coldness, that needs mean neediness. None of that is true. What I learned in those 7 days was less about him and more about me, about how much of my mental bandwidth had been quietly allocated to managing the emotional temperature of something that should have felt easier, about how good it felt to stop performing and just be still, about how clarity shows up almost every time when you give it silence to grow in. Every point we covered today connects back to the same truth. The most powerful move you can make in any relationship is to know yourself so well that your presence is a choice, not a reflex. When you're choosing to be there fully, consciously, that's not a strategy. That's intimacy. And it attracts the kind of connection that actually holds. You already know more than you think. Sometimes you just need to get quiet enough to hear it. Tell me in the comments, did any of this hit home for you? Have you ever gone quiet in a relationship? And what happened? I read every comment and I genuinely want to know your experience. If this video gave you something real to think about, subscribe to Lena. I post every week and I would love to have you here. We go deep on this stuff every single time. And if you want to keep going, watch this next. It picks up exactly where we just left off, and I promise it gets even more interesting. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.